This is EndCycle Versus, and this is one of those games along with One Step from Eden that's decided to do something new, something different with the Megaman Battle Network combat system, which in my opinion is an absolutely fantastic idea because the Battle Network games are one of those really rare, kind of weird examples in the games industry of something unique that actually remained unique for a long time. You know, normally in this industry when something is new and succeeds, it gets copied a whole bunch, people want to make their own version of it, it gets popular in a lot of ways so that you see more of it as time goes on. See things like Slay the Spire or Binding of Isaac, for instance, is like more recent examples of what I'm talking about. But in Battle Network's case, it's odd because it was popular enough for there to be 6 of those games, and yet you didn't really see much of any other games trying that same style, so it remained very unique to that series only. However, with the recent prevalence of deck builders and the like, it makes sense that it would come back around, because of course the Battle Network games were deck builders at heart, and so we are seeing more of that concept being sort of fleshed out and changed, and this is an example of that. Although it is not exactly a roguelite deck builder, it does have a mode of that, so if you're looking for something like One Step from Eden, this is a little bit different than that, and is in fact a game with sort of a multiplayer versus focus, but it also has a whole bunch of modes. So there is of course the online versus mode where you can 1v1 other people with your own constructed decks and characters ready to go, but there's significantly more to this game than that, surprisingly. There's a full-on campaign mode that is constructed of a bunch of mini-campaigns that are about 5 missions each, which actually give you a story for the characters and actually help to unlock other characters and get you some currency and stuff to build your own decks later. There is also a roguelite deck builder mode that will be very familiar to you if you've played one of these before. It works quite well and has an ascending difficulty, several fun boss battles, and a cool idea of how to sort of build your own decks of these VOCs, the sort of chips that you will be using as attacks throughout the encounters as you go. And it has all the other trappings that you would expect, like sort of passive relics to get and various treasures to find and different events to accomplish and all sorts of stuff like that. So it is not just an afterthought, it is a fully featured roguelite mode, which is really appreciated because it gives some significant single-player content to this game as well. There's also an offline versus mode if you'd like to practice against bots or just try out your various decks and things like that, and you can customize the difficulty of the bots and the various aspects of the fight, like what stage you're going to be on and things like that, so that is also fully featured, which is nice. There's a mode where you have to fight against increasingly difficult waves of enemies and just try and survive as long as you can, so it's sort of like the ultimate test for the decks that you've constructed to see if they're capable of going against harder and harder enemies. And there's also another game mode where you can go against increasingly difficult waves of enemies, but you only have 4 attacks to choose from, and you have to constantly replace one of them every time you win. So it's sort of like a way to familiarize yourself with different strategies, because you're going to be constantly adapting your strategy to do different things as you're constantly replacing your deck with new bits. So yeah, there's actually quite a lot of single player stuff here. So if you're feeling that this is just a multiplayer game, that is definitely not the case. There's a lot of single player stuff to enjoy as well. But the main way that everything works is you will build a deck that consists of 3 sets of 4 skills, and you can switch between them real time in combat, so you have all 12 skills available at any given time. However, you can only have 1 skill of each level on each sort of page of your skills. So if you have a single level 1 skill on one of your sets, then you can't put any more level 1 skills on that particular set, then we'll have to put them on one of the 2 others that you have access to. There isn't like an energy or a mana type of resource, instead everything is cooldown based, and importantly the cooldowns for each level of skill actually affect all of the skills of that level on the other sets you have. So if you use your level 2 skill, obviously the one you just used will be put on cooldown, but also all of your other level 2 skills that you have equipped will be put on cooldown as well. So you do have to be careful. You can't just spam as many skills as you have and then switch to your next set and spam those too. You actually have to put a lot of thought into which ones you're using when, and as the levels ascend, so does the cooldown. So level 4 skills, for instance, take a very long time before you can use them again, whereas level 1 skills can be used quite rapidly. And there is quite a lot of depth to this system, because you have all the various levels of skills that you can equip, but you also have styles which modify skills in various ways while also raising their level. So you can have a style that, for instance, changes the element of a skill to make it do a different element of damage. There is a full elemental rock, paper, scissors system, and different characters can be of different elements and take increased or decreased damage from skills of certain elements. There are certain tiles on the battlefield, like say metal tiles, that will amplify lightning elemental damage and so on and so forth. And you also have styles that can push or pull enemies to help to zone enemies. You've got styles that give you health in return, or styles that give you a certain buff or give the enemy a debuff. There are all sorts of styles that can modify each and every skill to make it different. So overall, you're going to have a deck of 12 different skills, many of them styled, as long as the level restrictions that you have permit it, geared towards a very specific strategy. So since you have 12 skills to choose from at any given time, you're going to be building a deck that is meant to do a really specific thing, like all fire damage, or all pushing and pulling enemies to zone them around lava fields, or something like that. You generally have a deck that is based around a very specific goal. And because there are a large number of different skills to choose from, as well as all these styles that can modify the skills, there are many thousands of possible combinations for all sorts of creative decks that you can come up with. And there's even a really cool recipe system that allows you to save a current deck that you've created as a recipe, so you can load it with other characters later, or you can even upload and download other decks from the internet, so you can actually see what other people on places like the Steam Workshop have created and download some of their pre-made decks to see their recipes and what they use. And you can even, there's a system to buy, just auto-buy all of the stuff that you're missing from any recipe that you download if you have the currency. So this encourages a lot of experimentation and a lot of just fooling around with the various deck building mechanics and coming up with some neat strategies. The battles, of course, take place on a real-time tile-based map, which has variously colored tiles. So the tiles of your color you can step on. The gray tiles are neutral and can be stepped on by anyone, and the tiles of the other color can only be stepped on by the enemy. And there are, of course, various skills that can change the color of tiles, things like taking over some enemy tiles or neutralizing some of yours to give yourself a buff and things like that. But there's also a pretty tremendous amount of depth to remember in terms of the various tile types. So you have the obvious stuff like cracked tiles, where if you move over them they'll break so that you can no longer move that way, which is a way to zone your enemy around and block them into various disadvantageous positions. You've also got stuff like ice tiles, which will cause you to slide, lava tiles, which will make you take damage if you step on them, grass tiles, which will heal you if you stay on them, and many more besides. But the cool thing about the tiles isn't just what they do if you step on them and whatnot, but also how they interact with the various elements of characters and the VOCs, the skills. Because there are, as I mentioned with the metal and lightning example earlier, there are a lot of tiles and attacks that interact with each other. So if you use like an ice attack on an ice tile, you can actually freeze someone that's on it, or if you can melt an ice tile, for instance, which will do more damage to certain types of characters and less damage to others. So there's actually a pretty tremendous amount of hidden depth in this game in terms of how all of the elements and damage types and tile types and character types all interact with each other, and it creates this pretty dynamic, fast-paced, frantic-feeling game where it seems like there's always a strategy to win. I'm not very good at the game, I'll admit I'm pretty bad at it, but I've also never really felt like I was in an unwinnable situation, like there's nothing I could have done to win, I just had to sort of sit there and die. It felt like there was always something I could do, or some sort of strategy I could employ if I was just fast enough, or I remembered all the interactions enough. It's a really neat feeling because it feels very complex, but all the complexity is sort of in your face so that you have to remember it all at any given time, which means that it all is constantly interacting and you don't really get a chance to forget these interactions because they're not rare. They happen in every match. There's always all sorts of strategies being employed at a very fast pace, like a really breakneck game of chess. On top of all that, the characters themselves don't just have an element that affects how they interact with certain tiles and damage types, but they also have various stats. They have a power stat, which is just your basic damage. You have a speed stat, which is how fast your cooldowns go, and some other stuff like that. And every character also has a special sort of ultimate ability that builds up over time. It also builds up faster if you take damage, and this is generally a very powerful sort of game finisher type of ability that you can use, but the cool thing about them is they still require a good amount of skill to be used properly. They aren't just I win buttons. They actually do require a good amount of aiming and timing to be used successfully. So that's basically the gameplay loop. Create a deck, learn it on all of its possibilities inside out, and use it as effectively as possible against increasingly difficult enemies and or people online that are probably better than you and will trash you, and just enjoy the really neat strategies that are happening. It's a pretty great game. It does feel very competitively balanced, which I will totally admit that is not usually my thing, but in this case it actually also doesn't forget to be fun, which I find that a lot of competitive balance does. It tends to suck the color right out of a game, but in this case that is absolutely not true, and it is in fact a really fun and interesting game while still being quite competitive. Also, in addition to all of this and all of its modes and things, there is a significant amount of mod support built into the game, which is a big plus for me at all times. There's even a modding section right on the main menu that you can select, allowing you to browse mods in-game in a browser. So that's really cool. You can mod all sorts of things, and there are, of course, a lot of characters that are modded in, each with their own statistics and things, and some of them with their own ults and various cool new modded in characteristics that didn't exist before, so that's awesome. As you would expect, there's a lot of Mega Man and Megaman Battle Network characters, so that's awesome. There's also, you can mod in new attacks and entirely new VOCs if you want to go with the characters that you're modding in, or just to fill in gaps that you feel are there. You can mod in entirely new game modes if you want, and there's several of those available. So yeah, the modding scene of this game is really awesome, and in fact you're seeing several bits of modded content in the background right now because I wanted to highlight how cool it is and how flexible it is, because I'm always a fan of modding scenes in games, especially ones that are officially supported like this, so I wanted to just highlight how awesome it is to have something like that available right in the main menu. But that is EndCycle Versus. It's a pretty solid version of this sort of Mega Man Battle Network combat system made into a sort of competitive concept that is quite well balanced and has a lot of tactical variety and a lot of opportunity for some really cool plays and stuff. So if you are at all interested in this sort of thing, definitely do check it out. I will of course link you in the description below this video to the Steam store page if you would like to see it for yourself. Thank you guys very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.